In the last few weeks, it felt kind of strange to produce the videos for my channel. The world is holding its breath, everything revolves around one thing. What impact will this disease have on our lives and our future? How will the situation affect the health of my family? What impact will this lockdown have on the economy of my own country? It's true that technology and hobbies such as filmmaking are great ways to get away from it all and forget the problems of everyday life. On the other hand, one of the best aspects of a YouTube channel and these videos is that you can get in touch with so many people around the world and tell stories from the other side of the world. That's why today I want to tell you an Italian story, the story of how the virus has been experienced in Italy, what has happened and how we have reacted to it so far. When the first reports about the new coronavirus from China appeared in the news, very few people in Italy were really worried. Which is no wonder, as other viruses such as the SARS virus, for example, never really arrived in Italy. At the end of January, 2 tourists from China who came from the Hubei region were tested positive. The 2 tourists had arrived via Milan and then visited Rome with a tourist bus. Italy cancelled all flights to and from China. I do not want to claim that these 2 tourists were responsible for the outbreak of the coronavirus in Italy. Nobody can say that. They were quite simply the first 2 persons to be officially tested positive. It is not clear today how many people were already infected in Italy at that time. Today, many people assume that several had already been infected with the virus at that time. It was not until several weeks later that it became clear that the coronavirus was actually spreading in Italy. After a 38-year-old man was admitted to hospital in Lombardy with breathing difficulties and pneumonia, his wife told the authorities that her husband had been in contact with a Chinese businessman. The man from Lombardy, who was later described by the media as Paziente Uno, was then tested positive. That was on February 21st. He had probably already infected several people, including his wife. However, it could not be confirmed to this day that the Paziente Uno had actually contracted the disease from his Chinese business partner. The story of this first patient was closely followed in Italy. Mattia, that is his name, barely survived and was kept alive with the help of ventilators. I think it was very important for the Italians that he survived, simply for morale and to give hope to the country. His story was to be a symbol of what was to come. It would be a tough battle, but one that could be survived. When the illness of Paziente Uno became known, many new illnesses and cases occurred within a few days. This was probably not because the virus suddenly spread in Italy, but rather because they had begun to test people who were ill. It was also during this period that the first confirmed deaths occurred in Italy. The Paziente Uno, as already mentioned, comes from Lombardy. Lombardy is located in the north of Italy. If we take a look at the map, Lombardy is here and I, for example, live, as some of you may know, in the Alps, so a bit further north. That is also the reason why my first language is actually German and not Italian. The capital of Lombardy is Milan, and this region is very important for Italy as it is the economic center of the country. The coronavirus has therefore hit Italy right at its economic heart. Lombardy is still today the region in Italy with the most cases and also deaths. Perhaps it is also interesting to note that on February the 19th, a soccer match between Atalanta Bergamo and the Spanish team FC Valencia took place in Milan in front of more than 40,000 people. As you probably know, soccer is by far the most popular sport in Italy. The fact is that only a few weeks after the match, especially in Bergamo, the number of cases has increased extremely strongly. That is why this game is now called Partita Zero. However, the connection is of course not proven. Since those days at the end of February, the virus has spread at breakneck speed in Italy. What was noticeable during this period at the end of February and the beginning of March is that it was very difficult to get tested. Anyone in my region who had only mild symptoms of influenza was told to stay at home. However, a test was not necessarily done. I cannot say whether this was because there were not enough tests available or because the problem was underestimated. We must not forget that the Alps were still in the middle of the winter season and were still full of tourists. Even a few confirmed cases of COVID-19 would have ended the season immediately. At some point, however, it was obvious that the virus would spread quickly and efficiently throughout the country. The main problem of this disease is easily explained and is probably the same in every country. The disease is extremely contagious and spreads rapidly. At the same time, many people need medical care, in the worst case artificial respiration. This combination very quickly pushes the sanitation system to its limits. There are many reports of terrible situations in overburdened hospitals in northern Italy, where doctors had to decide who could be given artificial respiration and who could not. This had to be made dependent on the survival probability of a patient. If it was too low, the patient could not be provided with a ventilator, simply because there was a lack of equipment. The ventilators had to be made available to those people who had a good chance of survival. And that was not the only problem. The medical staff also lacked protective clothing, masks, gloves and protective jackets. Even today, it is still not possible to buy a good respirator mask in the shop. All masks were sold immediately after the outbreak of the disease. As a result, several thousand hospital employees became infected, which was of course a problem, as they in turn infected other patients. Until today, many doctors have been infected with the virus and many also died from it. We were not at all prepared for this situation. It should not be forgotten that Italy was the first Western country to be so badly affected by the coronavirus. There was no time to prepare staff and hospitals for this situation. It is difficult to say why Italy in particular was hit so quickly and so hard. Italians are a very social people who maintain very close contact with their own families. At the same time, Italy has a very old population, which of course leads to very many serious cases. But of course, it could also have been just coincidence. In any case, the state had to take new measures. On March the 4th, schools were closed all over Italy, and they are still closed today. It is not clear until when. Cinemas and theaters were closed. On March the 9th, the whole country was declared a restricted zone. Restaurants and most shops had to close. Sports events were cancelled. One should only leave the apartment for certain reasons. Contact with other people should be kept to a minimum. To enable controls, the government introduced so-called self-declarations. If you are stopped by the police, you can now explain in writing why you're not at home. A false declaration was declared a crime. As the number of positive cases increased, the regulations became stricter and stricter. On March 20th, individual sports were also banned. Walks are now only allowed near your house. All these measures were unfortunately really necessary. It is of course difficult to comply with such restrictions. I think especially for such a lively and social people as the Italians. The people did not want to lose their zest for life, and from now on they will sing and play music on their balconies from 6 p.m. We are now in early April and the virus is by no means defeated. However, it can be said that the measures of social distancing are having an effect. Although there are still hundreds of deaths every day, the number of new positive cases is not really rising at the moment, but it has taken several weeks for this to happen. But I think that gives hope, and I am convinced that life here will continue in a few weeks. Probably not the same as before. It will take some steps, but you will have to be very careful in the beginning. But it will remain unforgotten that in Italy in such a short time, more than 10,000 people have died of this disease and hundreds of thousands have been infected. I would like to be careful about the specific figures. If the figures were to be believed, almost 10% of those infected in Italy die, which is certainly not true. This is simply because the people tested are mainly those who developed pneumonia. That is why the number of people infected in the various countries are not comparable. The latest estimates assume that in any case more than 1 million people have been infected in Italy. One estimate even speaks of 6 million people. But like I said, these are all just estimates. Apart from the human and sanitary disaster, there is however another aspect that will hit this country hard, and that is the economic impact. This crisis will affect every sector of the economy. But you can imagine that tourism is very important for Italy. The spring and summer seasons are approaching and the hotels, if they are able to reopen at all in the coming months, will in many cases remain empty. At the same time, Italy has been struggling with a large public debt for many years. In fact, the state should be saving and reducing its expenditure. Everyone can imagine that this will not be possible in this situation. It is therefore not clear at the moment what impact this situation will have on the financial situation of the state and its future. But also in this context, I think that a crisis always offers the possibility for a new beginning, the possibility to finally do what would have been necessary for a long time. Italy has a lot to offer. Besides beautiful landscapes, incredible beaches, the country has magnificent historical buildings and a fantastic food. And the Italian people have an incredible sense for beauty, design, fashion and fine arts. That's why I am convinced that this state will recover and will someday return to its former strength. I hope this short story and insight was interesting for you. Write me in the comments if you want me to report more often about this country and the life here. Wherever you live, I wish you all the best and that you and your family are doing well. I'm looking forward to every comment and see you next time.